Let's begin with para. Something that's very common with para is this idea of receiving something. For example, it's for me. So here I'm receiving something. It's for me. So it would be es para mí. Or it's for my sister. Now my sister is receiving it. So again, it's this idea of receiving. So we have para. The book is for my brother. So now my brother is receiving the book. And so we would use para for the word for. The coffee is for my grandparents. Now my grandparents are receiving coffee. So we would use para here. It doesn't have to be people. This idea, for example, extends in this way. This award is for the university. Here, the university is receiving the award. So we would use para here for. I bought this present for my sister yesterday. This sentence is a little bit more elaborate, but the principle is still intrinsically in there because my sister is going to receive this present that I bought for her. So we have para here. We can go even more abstract. Look at this example. Rain is good for the plants. Here, the plants are receiving or going to receive the rain. So we would use para. Going for walks is good for your dog. Here, the dog is receiving the walks. It's an action they're receiving. So again, we would use para for. Another example might be, I bought new guitar strings, or I bought new strings for my guitar. So here, it's the guitar that's receiving these new strings. So again, we would use para. One more example, we have paint for the house. Again, the house is going to receive this paint. So this is the idea, a very strong idea with para, is that this idea of receiving. Now, it doesn't have to be a physical thing that it's receiving. For example, here, the house is receiving something physical, receiving something tangible, which is paint. But we could also be receiving an action. For example, I cleaned the house for you. So here, okay, so you are receiving this thing that someone else did for you, something nice that someone did for you. They cleaned the house and you're receiving this action from them. It's an action that they did for you. You are in receipt of this action that they did. So here we have para. That kiss was for her. So here she's receiving this kiss. We prepared dinner for all the family. Here the family is receiving the fact that, say, the siblings prepared dinner for them. It was an action that they did. They prepared dinner, and the family are going to receive the benefits of this action, the results of this action. So it would be, again, para. Look at this one. My uncle can fix that computer for you. So here, you're receiving the action. The action is that your uncle is going to fix the computer, or whoever's uncle it may be is going to fix the computer. That's the action that they're doing, and you are going to receive the benefits of that action. So again, it's this idea of receipt, receiving. So again, we would have para. This one, lastly, did you reserve the ticket for my mom? Again, here we would use para because it's your mom that is the recipient of this action. Someone else reserved the ticket for whatever may be the show. Someone did that action, and your mom is going to receive the benefits of that action. So again, it's receiving, and we would use para. So this is probably one of the strongest uses and strongest things, or most powerful things, that you need to understand when it comes to para. Something very intrinsic and central with using para is this idea of receiving something. Now, it could be something physical, for example, the book. So my brother is receiving the book, right? That's something tangible. Or it could be something that's not so tangible. It could be an action. For example, I cleaned the house for you. So you received this action, the fact that someone else cleaned the house for you. Another very common and core use of para is when we're dealing with deadlines or dates in the future. For example, it will be ready for Tuesday. So Tuesday is the date or the deadline, however you want to view that. But it's a point in time. And we would use para here for because of the fact that we're talking about a point in time in the future, Tuesday. Another example would be, I'll be home for 2 o'clock. Here again, we have a deadline or a date in the future. So we would use para here. My son will be here for Christmas. This again is a date or a time in the future, Christmas. So we would use para here. This one, what do you want for your birthday? Your birthday is a date in the future, a time, a point in time in the future. So again, we would use para here. You could get a little bit more abstract. For example, what do you want for dinner tonight? Here, dinner tonight is a date in the future, a point in time in the future. So we would use para. What will the kids eat for lunch? Here's our date or deadline, lunch. So we would use para. The science project is due for next week. So here we have a deadline, a very clear deadline next week. So we would use para here for. Last one, it has to be done for tomorrow. Here again, we have a deadline tomorrow, so we would use para. So any time that we get this date or deadline, whether it's going to be Tuesday or 2 o'clock or Christmas, Easter, your birthday, dinner tonight, lunch, next week, tomorrow, in 5 minutes time, doesn't matter. Any time that we're dealing with a date or a deadline, we're going to be using para for. When referring to destinations, physical places, we're also going to be using para. For example, the train leaves for Mexico City at 1 p.m. So Mexico City is a destination, and we're going to be using para here. The bus departs this evening for Madrid. So again, Madrid is a physical location, it's a destination. So we would use para here. He sets off today for Peru. Again, he's leaving and his destination is Peru, so we would use para. This one is pretty straightforward. Any destination, it could be that you're leaving to go to the shop down the road, or it could be that you're leaving to go across to the other side of the world, to Thailand or Australia. Doesn't matter. We're going somewhere to a destination, doesn't matter how close or how far away, so we would use para. Another short example like this, doesn't take us too long to really go through it, would be with the idea of employment. So for example, I work for my father. Here we would use para. She works for that guy over there. Again, we would use para. Or they all work for me. Again, we're talking about employment, and so any examples like that, we would use para for. Another usage of para is with comparisons. So for example, he's quite short for a basketball player. Here, we would use para. What we're saying is that normally basketball players are typically tall, but this guy is quite short. He's quite short for a basketball player. In those situations, anything like that, we would be using para. Here's another example. For this time of year, the weather is rather warm. So it could be that we're in autumn, and where you live, you have the season starts to get significantly cooler in autumn as we go into winter. So we're saying para here. For this time of year, the weather is rather warm. Here's another one. For a science book, it's actually quite entertaining. So the idea is that normally science books are not that entertaining typically when you're in school, right? But you're saying for a science book, it's actually quite entertaining. So we would use para here. Here's one more example. She speaks English well for a foreigner. So we're using para here. She's a foreigner, but considering that she's a foreigner and that English is not her native tongue, her first language, she speaks English rather well. So this is the idea of comparison. Once more, he's quite short for a basketball player. For this time of year, the weather is rather warm. For a science book, it's actually quite entertaining. She speaks English well for a foreigner. For all these instances, we would be using para because we're making a comparison. You'll also use para when expressing opinion. Now, this could be your opinion or anyone else's opinion, including the opinion of the government or the opinion of an organization or anything like that, any opinion. For example, for me, I don't really like it. Now we could say, for me, I don't really like it, or we could say, in my opinion, I don't really like it. It works in both ways, but in Spanish, we would say, para mí, I don't really like it. Or, for example, here, for her, the kitchen is too small. So again, we would use para in here because we're talking about her opinion. So I don't think I need to do too many more examples like this because they will really be all exactly the same. For me, I don't really like it, or for her, the kitchen is too small. We're expressing opinions here, and we always use para. This next one is very, very useful. For example, I've labeled this as for or used for. So we have these gloves are for your hands. So here, this is where we'd be putting in para. So these gloves, what are they used for, or what are they for? Well, they're for your hands. So whenever we're saying something like that, whatever context it may be, we're using para. Here's another one. This extra screw is for the treadmill. So the screw is for the treadmill, or it's used for the treadmill. We're using para. This flour is used for pizza dough. So here we are saying used for, could equally be for pizza dough, but the concept is exactly the same. That truck is used for transporting livestock. Again, it's getting pretty self-explanatory, I imagine now. Again, this truck is being used for transporting livestock, so we use para. Lastly, this example, those machines are for sorting mail. So that's what they're used for, that's what they're being used for, how they're being used. So we would use para. This next example, in order to, is something that we have already been using quite a lot in the course. The idea is that whenever to in a sentence, this to here, implies in order to, then we would put in para. For example, I went there to speak to him. Now here, the to is implying in order to. I went there in order to speak to him. So in those instances, we would throw in para before the verb. Here's another example. The plane has to slow down in order to land safely on the runway. In English, we would really just say the plane has to slow down to land safely on the runway. But this to again before the verb is implying in order to. So we would throw in para before this verb to land. In order to arrive on time, you should leave earlier. Again, this to is implying in order to. So we would throw in para here before this verb of to arrive. This is something that we've already done quite a lot in the course, so I imagine that you're already quite used to it. And one small extra that we can throw in here at the end, to say forever, in Spanish it would be para siempre, literally for always, para siempre. If your head is spinning a little bit after all of those different uses, I want you to know that that is perfectly normal. As we go through and we do more and more examples, more drills, more testing, more explanations, you're going to get a real feel for whether to use por or para. So I just want you to hang in there with me for a few videos more and you'll start to feel what I mean. So just to quickly revise now what we've been through with para. One of the main and most important core meanings of para is to imply this idea of receiving. And remember that we can receive something physical or we could receive an action. Then any time that we're talking with dates or deadlines in the future, it doesn't matter if it's lunchtime, Christmas, your birthday, or the year 2025, we're going to be using para in those instances too. Another easy one is with destinations. So the destination, remember, could be that you're going to the garden shed outside in your own back garden, or it could be that you're going to China. Doesn't matter. Because it's a destination, we're going to be using para. Another easy one is employment. So anytime you're talking about who you work for or who works for you, we're using para. Then whenever making comparisons, for example, this one we had, he's quite short for a basketball player, or she speaks well for a foreigner, speaks English well for a foreigner. Those are comparisons, so we would use para. Then we have our opinions, whether it's our opinion or someone else's opinion, or the opinion of an institution, or the opinion of a magazine, we use para. And then this one is very useful, for or used for. For example, these gloves are for your hands. That's what they're used for. You'll find yourself using that particular instance quite a lot in your everyday speaking. Then we have this one which we already know quite well. Whenever to implies in order to, we throw in para before the verb. And then finally that little extra bit at the end where we have forever. That would be literally for always, para siempre. So these are the main uses or instances where we're going to be using para. Next up, we'll go on to por, and that's going to be important because then you'll be able to compare and contrast how one feels very different from the other in its usage.